an engagement manager at Acquia. So even though I'm an engagement manager and I've been a project manager pretty much my entire career, really I have a background as well in usability as well as 508 testing. So when you're wondering why does a project manager care so much about content strategy and UX and IA, granted we like to care about those things anyway, but that's the reason why I'm the one to give this workshop when we do it for Acquia. And honestly, we've actually only done it once. The reason is, for those of you who know about Acquia, we do a lot with hosting, we have engineering, we have products. Yes, we have professional services, but at the same time, we are not like a lot of other agencies out there where we do things soup to nuts, where we start with the design and we're the ones that do the design and the IA. Generally, we bring in another digital agency in order to do this type of work. But there are some cases, right, where either there isn't a budget for a digital agency to come in, maybe somebody else has made a decision about the project, and so it's kind of past that point where you can bring somebody in to kind of do that full discovery portion that includes the IA and some of that usability work. And so that's the reason why this really came in. So I will completely admit to you that my presentation name is pretty much a misnomer. And the reason why I say that, right, because when we think of content workshops, we think pretty much of mostly content strategy. But this is a content workshop with content strategy, but we're also talking about IA and usability. It's kind of why I talked about that. Also, it would be great to give our clients or our own organization, if we're doing this within our own agency or business, everything that you need to know, right? But just like I talked about how I do usability in 508, I didn't just wake up one morning and go, okay, I just did like a one-day workshop and I'm all good. Like I know everything that there is to know, right? It would be fantastic if we could knowledge share like that, but it doesn't actually work. So this is really more of a starting point and using, a way to guide people to give them the tools that they need. So really, we would love for this to happen before development, because I don't know if any of you have been on projects where development is kind of in the middle and all of a sudden somebody goes, hey, you know what, we should really think about our content. We should start focusing on our navigation. It's possible, but guess what? There is a lot of rework involved in that, and there is just a lot of things to happen. And if, for those of you who are in Drupal and kind of know a lot of kind of the pieces that go into it, some of these projects that we've done this for are using organic groups. So if you had a structure for organic groups and you don't change the IA and you use the same navigation that you had before, those not so good organic groups, when you do your rebuild, are still going to be not as good. So that's really kind of why we do this. And this content workshop, IA UX workshop, should really happen over several days. For us, I think we ended up doing it about 6 hours over a week. So you can do it in one day, but at the same time, it's not really going to work as well. And the reason for that, if we take a look at our structure, it's because on our first day, we really want to talk about big picture concepts. We don't really want to go quite into the nitty-gritty yet. Again, that really depends on who your audience is. If they have a big background in this, you probably don't want to spend a lot of time on those big picture concepts if they already know them. But assuming that they don't have the tools that they need, that's really where we would start. We'd then go into the content strategy and then into the IA and usability. And everybody loved this when I presented it the first time that they had homework, because everybody loves to go back to their school days, right? But at the same time, it is necessary. It is very necessary to really solidify that information and make sure that they have what they need. So in terms of this presentation, I'm going to really give you some details in terms of this is exactly what we talked about. And some of it is just concepts, because as I said, it took about 6 hours. And while we really like this conference, I don't think we like it that much that we all want to sit here for 6 hours and go through every single slide. So some of this will kind of depend, again, on your previous knowledge coming into some of these things. So if you have any questions, either ask them at the end or come up and talk to me, and I'm more than happy to explain anything that you may not already know about. Okay, so in terms of our day one, First thing to do is intros, which I know may seem really obvious, but the reason why I say that is because not only do you want to know who's in the room, but you want to know what their role is and really what they're trying to get out of the workshop itself. Because I can give somebody my name and have this thing in my head of, you know what, I really think that they're going to talk about this, or I really hope Danielle talks about this, and then find out that because I didn't know what you wanted to talk about, right, I have absolutely no idea that that's what's on your mind. So allow yourself to really get that information. Other people in the room might kind of jump on what that person said too, right? And you can make it more of a conversation, because the workshop is a workshop. It's not a presentation. It's not something where I go into a room and I talk at people. I really want things to be interactive when I do this. And, when we bring it to more of Acquia and more of our engagement managers, it's really meant to be interactive. So use that time. The next thing is to talk about goals and kind of the workshop design, make sure everybody understands what's going on, and then really talking about some of those big picture concepts. So in terms of some of the goals, right, obviously what do you want for your agency or your business, and what do you want for your website? You really hope that those things align, but that's a good conversation to have, right, because sometimes they don't. I've definitely started, in previous companies when I've started at the very beginning of a project and said, okay, what are your goals? And people just kind of look at each other like, oh, we don't know, because they haven't thought about it yet. So it's a really good discussion to have as the very first thing you do. And the next thing is make them think about other websites. And that probably seems like common sense to a lot of us, not always common sense to everybody else. And the reason why I say that is the fact that a lot of times, and I know all of us are probably guilty of it too, we know what we know, and we know what we want for our vision, potentially, for our websites. And people a lot of times don't think about, when I use this other website, this is what I love in the layout, and this is what I love in the navigation, and this is what I love in the features, and maybe I can take some of that and bring it over to my site. I actually had a client pre-Acquia where I said, okay, what do you like? And I got an answer for the menu of, yeah, what are those things called when you go to the top and you drop down and then you go out to the side. I was like, flyout menus? She was like, yeah, those. Okay, I had to hide my horror because, flyout menus, I hate to say, are so 1995, but at the same time, right, we know that there are so many other good ways that are accessible, that are, a lot more user friendly. And then when I said, okay, well, let's talk about a few examples. Like, where have you seen this? Show me what you like about it. And we go to that site and she starts playing around on her computer and she goes, wow, it is really hard to roll over to that third level. This is really difficult. Haha, and so really getting people's mind out of that as opposed to just giving them a worksheet and saying, okay, what do you like? Tell me. It's a lot better of a conversation. And so once you have that conversation of what do you love, or in some cases, what do you absolutely hate on these other websites, and then bringing it into their own after that really, really helps. It's just a good conversation starter. And the other thing too, you can get people's heads from going too far, right? Because it's great if their favorite site is Netflix and hey, I love what they do with all these videos. Okay, if you're a government agency that doesn't have videos on their site, or you know what I mean, you're not doing this huge video player as the main central piece, kind of want to gear people away from that. So it really, again, my least favorite phrase, it depends, but a lot of this content depends on what people are saying to you. So in terms of important concepts, the first one that I always like to talk about is the mental model. And that's really what are the user's expectations of what they're going to see and what they're going to do. A lot of this is related to usability best practices. But if we take you out of that and go into the real world, not like the internet is not real, right? But we want to talk about something that you can kind of touch and feel. I always like the example of door handles, right? When you have a handle, what do you think you normally do? You're supposed to pull. I do not believe for one second I'm the only person who has come to a door handle and pulled and then been like, oh, hey, I'm supposed to push. And people laugh at you. And, they're like, hey, but the sign on the door says push. Okay, you should not need a sign for a door, right? Just like when you have that flat bar. So you guys are laughing because I know I'm not the only one who's done this. But when you have that flat bar, right? What do you think you should do? Push. Oh, no, you were supposed to pull. So if we take that example and we put it on the web, right? I have seen people do search at the bottom of their page. Maybe that works for some people, but it's not consistent. It's not what people expect. It's like when you have a login link, but it's the 6th link down, but yet logging in is vitally important to the website, right? It's not consistent with how people think. So that's really one of the main things that we want to talk about, because as we get to information architecture, as we get to usability, those things really come into play. And then I don't need to go through kind of all the usability and content criteria, but if you're familiar a lot with Nielsen's work, this is really where it comes from, just in terms of being intuitive is really what it has to do with. Okay, so in terms of site strategy, we've already kind of talked about some of those website goals. We've talked about business goals. We've talked about agency goals. Other thing to really focus people on is their target audiences and target users. And we'll talk about how to do that. Same thing with scenarios, tasks, and personas. So you can see, even though we're talking about big picture concepts, we're almost in that like user-centered design, usability world, because content, IA, usability, they all come together. So in terms of target audiences and users, I always feel like a lot of times I have to rein people in, because they say, who are your target audiences? And I get like 10 different answers, which is good that people know generally who their target audience is. But at the same time, trying to get your content and your layout and kind of all the pieces of your site to 10 different types of audiences, don't like to use the word impossible, but it's kind of impossible, right? Think about that navigation and how each one of those users is going to try to use it, thinking about the layout and the priority. Trying to get to that many people is just really, really difficult. So we generally like to say 3 to 5 is really the best. 3, that's my magic number, but I let people push it up to 5 if they need to. But it's really kind of the best way to look at it in terms of making sure that your site doesn't try to become that everything to everyone and just making the work that you're doing essentially turn into a big mess. So the best way to really do this is through user profiles. And some of these will matter and some of them won't. We're actually finding kind of in usability with age that's not, really concerning us as much. I know it used to be that, older users are much more used to browsing and, the younger kids, they all want search. Well, you know what? That's not really true anymore. Everybody wants search. They want to find something right away, right? I don't know if it's just because the internet has made our attention span very, very small or what the reason is, but whatever it is, everybody wants to search, right? They want to find things very, very quickly. But sometimes it does come into play, in terms of colors. It comes into play with how you're able to see fonts, things of that nature. So if you know that you have a younger audience or an older audience, that may affect your design. Domain expertise does not mean, do you know www. whatever, and what a domain is. It means your actual expertise in terms of whatever that subject is. So if we're talking about, music, how well do you know music? And, do these people know music really well? Well, then maybe our content is going to be different. Or maybe we're going to target, the way that things are prioritized or what content shows up on the actual page. So that's really where we're looking at. Again, occupation, maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. Technological constraints, are people mostly going to be on mobile? Are people mostly going to be on desktop? At this point, again, that's starting to become a little bit moot, right? Because we like to say everything is mobile first. It just makes things easier and you never know. You can't obviously go look at every single one of your users and determine whether or not they're using mobile or desktop. But there could even be, something where, for example, if you're building something for construction, right? So people might be outside a lot more. And so will that, change whether or not you have something on a site and they don't really have internet access, you need to focus more on an app or whatever it may be. So that's the reason why that's up there. And then just online frequency. If they're online a lot more, maybe you can offer a little bit more, have them dig a little bit deeper. If they only visit your site, maybe once a week, more things need to be up top. What content does that need to be, etc. And then the next thing is task profiles. So what tasks are users actually looking to perform? And then making sure that you're prioritizing them. And again, it may be different depending on the user, and we'll talk about how to actually use that later. But it's really important to focus on all of those different things to kind of set the stage. So a lot of people, when they hear scenarios and tasks, they're not quite sure what the difference is. So I don't want to have to read all of this to you, but essentially if we're looking at a travel example, it's somebody knowing that they need to find a flight, they need to go book a hotel, rent a car. But then the task example is if I went to rent a car, here are all the small things that I need to do. So it's basically the tasks are kind of underneath that umbrella of scenarios. And then I'm sure a lot of you have heard about personas. I know that there were actually a few sessions this week about personas. So personas are really good to make somebody real. And I know that I've used these in the past to really, really good things. And because what happens a lot of times if it's, oh yeah, these people who are just using the website, right? They kind of go into this black hole of they're just people using the website. But if you think about John, and these are all the things that John is going to do, and you reference John and you talk about John and you know everything that he's going to be doing, it really makes it more real to your designers and your developers, and it just seems more personal and really has a good effect. So that's all of our day one. And essentially, right, we talked about homework. So in terms of our homework, this is just some examples, right? You could take anything that we just talked about and come up with more depending on, if you're doing this workshop and you're doing, one little piece every single week, maybe you want to give people a little bit more. It really just depends. But what I ended up doing was I asked each individual actually to come up with their top 3 to 5 target audience members, come up with personas, make sure they have the scenarios and tasks. And I asked them to do it individually because I wanted to see kind of the variety of what people thought, right? We talked about kind of what were those goals when they came into the workshop. You really never know if people are on the same page, right? About whether or not they agree who the target audience is and what they're trying to do and what the priorities are. And so that isn't to say that they go off and do this individually and then it's all said and done and everything's finished. It's a way to get them to think, to make sure to solidify all of the principles, to give them an example of what they actually just talked about. And then the goal is either, at the start of that day 2 or even kind of on their own. And we'll talk later about kind of the tasks moving forward after this workshop. It allows them to talk more and to actually go through and get some of that information together, make sure that they do end up on the same page as they start into their development work. So the second piece is content strategy. People always laugh at this a little bit because content inventory, editorial calendar, taxonomy, all important things, writing for the web. A lot of people think they know how to write for the web, and there are a little, some people I see smiling, see laughing. Yeah, some people just still don't know how to write for the web properly. The one I get the most laughs about is PDF versus web pages. Yeah, it happens a lot that people don't know, and I'm sorry for those of you that work in the government. I am a government contractor. Ooh, it happens a lot. And the other thing, I can't even remember the statistic from the study, but I remember reading a study a few months ago about the number of PDFs that are not read on government websites, and the statistic was astounding. It was definitely over 50%. So we're going to talk about how to make sure that you know the difference of when you should use a PDF and when you should not. So content inventory, just really, really quickly to talk about this, is it's a list of all the content on the site. It's what people complain about the most, right? Because a lot of times that can be a lot of different content. So maybe you want a content owner for every section of the site. Totally up to you how you want to do that. But it's really geared towards making sure that every piece of content has a purpose. So in terms of what to capture, we put in the title, the URL, the format, different statuses. It's really just a way to make sure that you know what type of content, is in your system. Because the biggest problem that we find when we do rebuilds, and I don't even mean we Acquia, I just mean anybody that works in this space, is that old content and bad content goes from the old system to the new system. Well, guess what? You're trying to make your new system better, so it really doesn't help you very much if your bad content is coming over. So that's really the purpose of that. But for the editorial calendar, it's really making sure, too, it's almost the same thing, right? That you want to make sure that you have people, after you've done that content inventory, that you go through and you determine who's going to own the content and how should it be reviewed and who's going to review it and what should happen with it. So much, or so many times, I should say, we have a lot of people that, do that content inventory and they do all this work and they move their content over and everything's great. And then they just sort of forget about it. So you don't want your content to end up the same way that it was before. So in terms of taxonomy, I'm not going to talk about this too much because those of us that work in Drupal are pretty familiar with taxonomy, but it's just a way to make sure that you know how to categorize your content. I say limit categorization because I've definitely seen people try to over-categorize their content, and you don't need people drilling down, right, like 10 layers into a category. So sometimes it does take a little bit of work, but again, practice makes nearly perfect. And so we just kind of make things categorized in the site, and we'll talk about that, like homework assignments, soon too. So writing for the web. So I'm not going to go into a whole course or conversation about how to write for the web. But really in your workshop, you should talk about how to. So you should go and do some of the research if you don't already have those tips of the best ways to write for the web, making things kind of being like the inverted pyramid and headings and when to use bullets, when to use lists, things like that. I put up these 4 links. There is nothing like special about these 4 pieces of content. It was just when I was doing a search, it's what I found. And really, I love to use examples, right, in these workshops so people, again, can see the actual concept in play. But it's showing, you can have a long page of content with a lot of paragraphs, and it can work. Use headings, please. It's kind of one of those things, just like because a lot of people have heard about, I'm supposed to use lists. Like I need to use lists to break up my content. Well, if your content isn't made up of lists, you know what I mean? If you don't have lists in your content, why are you going to use bullets or numbers in your content? It doesn't make sense. It's just something that I think people came up with as a way to shorten your content, but it doesn't work in every case. So that's really kind of the reason why I'm showing this, showing people how to break things up through images. I'm not going to pretend it is rocket science. It really isn't, but there are a lot of people, again, who don't normally write for the web. They're used to writing for print, and it's okay if you have 5 printed pages and they don't realize that online that doesn't work as well, or if you need to do that, that there's a special way to actually get it done. So in terms of PDFs and web pages, again, I apologize if this is common sense, but I obviously have it up here because it's a conversation that needs to be had in certain spaces. So I put this more in here not to necessarily teach all of you, but it is more if you have clients that are really into like the PDF world and they absolutely need a reason why they should not be building a PDF, why they need web pages. So I just wanted to make sure that all of you had those talking points if you need them. That isn't to say that you should never use a PDF ever on your website. If you're publishing an ebook, maybe you want to put that as a book in Drupal. Using books in Drupal, I'm sorry if anybody loves them. They can be a huge pain. And so PDF might be better, right? That makes more sense. That's why a lot of times when you buy an ebook from, an online retailer, that's why it's still in PDF. So there are some good cases for it. But if you have 2 pages of content, web page is usually the way to go. So in terms of your example homework that you can give your clients, or again, if you're doing this within kind of your own business or agency, what you can do, I always like people to kind of practice their content inventory, just to make sure that they're really thinking through, like, what are the statuses I should have? I should think about what content needs to be added. A lot of people don't think about that. They think about what needs to be edited. They think about what needs to be removed. They don't think about maybe what could be split up or what needs to be added to the site. So kind of doing that check and that help for them. Having them take one piece of content from the site and then talking about how they would restructure it and why. Doesn't even mean that they have to come to you with the new piece of content. It's just kind of, I looked at this and I think we should kind of keep it the same, but we should add headings and subheadings here, and this is the reason why I took that approach. And then again, because of the over-categorization, and sometimes there are a lot of people that don't understand taxonomy and kind of how it either works in Drupal or just really how it works in terms of categorizing content at all, that if they should have a vocabulary, that, just asking them to come up maybe with two, just to make sure, again, it's all about double checking and make sure people are good before you send them on their way. All right, so now that we've talked about all of that, we get into the fun of IA and usability. So on this day, we're really talking about navigation, card sorting, which if those of you who haven't heard that before, I'll talk about it a little bit, wireframes, and then basic usability. So again, navigation. I kind of gave that example of like the fly-out menus, but it's why we need to think about other sites and kind of how we might want to apply changes to our own site that we're working with. I usually talk about navigation schemes or schemas, how there's, thinking about things in a topic format, maybe doing it by user group. Sometimes there's an overlap of both. Making sure that they sort of know how to prioritize items. I know that there are people that used to do things like alphabetically, a lot of times people know now, like, let me look at Google Analytics or something else. Doesn't always tell the full story as to why people are clicking on things, but at least gives you a little bit of information there. And then analyzing kind of that current navigation that you have. Are there any inconsistencies where, a breadcrumb on a page is saying that you're going one place, but really it's in another menu? I have a huge pet peeve with navigation items being in multiple menus. So basically, if you have an FAQ, have your FAQ in one place. You do not need to send users there from multiple places. It uses up space. And it's also really, really confusing to people because they're like, oh, it's called FAQ. It must be two separate things, or there's a mistake on a site or something. It really goes back to Steve Krug's, don't make me think book. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. You don't want the user to have to think very hard. So make it easier for them. Unnecessary or redundant steps and number of unnecessary clicks kind of go together. Don't make people go down 4 links if it's really important content. Just sometimes there actually is content on your site that people should have to click into 4 times. If it's something that only 15 people on your site and you have, 10,000 users, it is actually okay to go down 4 clicks. I know people freak out sometimes and they hear that, oh my gosh, you're making them click more. Sometimes they should have to click more. It's okay. So just let it happen. It'll be fine. But just in terms of, sorry, I'm skipping slides, card sorting and wireframes, just for time. So explain what they are and why they're important. So card sorting, for you guys who don't know, is a way to analyze navigation. And essentially, you can do it through index cards. You can do it through PowerPoint. You may not like yourself very much if you choose either one of those options. So I recommend there's this first one that I have here, Optimal Workshop. I definitely recommend that. It's an online tool. Last time I checked, it was $10 a month. So I know sometimes procurement can be a little bit difficult, but just tell them it's not going to be big money because it really isn't. But essentially what you do is you can come up with some ideas of what you want those top navigation items to be and what should live under them. And basically just set up the tool. So you say, okay, these are my main navigation items. You send the link to a whole bunch of people. They go in on their own and they say, okay, I think, this link or this topic should be under this main nav. I think this should be here. They basically help create your navigation for you. And at the end, you get a lot of really helpful charts and analysis to help you. So does that mean that that's going to happen and automatically, you have this miraculous navigation? Not necessarily, right? You might have to do some tweaking, but at the same time, it's very good for the fact that you will have, some analysis on what you're thinking. You may realize, we actually got all these terms and they're great. Or you may realize, we need to do this again. Let's give it another try. The good thing about card sorting is that people can actually go in and, say, actually, this term was confusing. This is what I would recommend. Like, you can ask some questions at the end too. So you're not just looking at what people kind of put together in silos and that's it and you're done. So you do have some follow-up there. So wireframes, I generally explain that to people as like a foundation of a house, right? Like you don't build the house before you have the blueprints. If you do, good luck. I don't know how that actually works out, but that's essentially what I explain to people. And even though I put up a few tools like UXPin and OmniGraffle, there are plenty of others out there, I actually tell people it is okay to take a piece of paper and sketch things out. It's better than nothing. It helps with content priority, making sure that people actually know where things might live. And again, I say do this on your own, just as a way to come together and make sure that, you have the same expectations. And if not, you need to have a conversation. So next thing is really connecting it, right? I talked about the mental model. Obviously, you do not need to give them the door handle and the, push example, but again, search, login, where people generally expect items to be, reading left to right, up and down. And this is one for you to look up or come ask me afterwards because I could spend like a whole presentation on Gestalt's principles, but essentially it's more about similarity and making things are, like their approximation to each other and things of that nature. So that's really a big UX principle there. And in terms of usability in general. So everything else, I feel like if you don't have the expertise, can kind of look up and learn a little bit on your own to give the client the tools that they need. Now, maybe this is just me being a UX expert and being that person, but I really feel that if you don't know a lot about usability, this is the one place where you really should tell the client, like, go get an expert if you want to do this. To me, this is kind of like search engine optimization, right? If you do SEO wrong, you really want your results to go up on all the pages on like Google and Bing and whatever search engine you use, right? And if you do SEO incorrectly, they can go down. It's kind of like with usability. If you try to do some things that you don't know how to do them well, you could really affect content priority. You could really affect kind of the way that the site actually works and how people use it. So that's not to scare you. It's just, we've talked about giving clients the tools that they need. And again, not making them experts, but at the same time, this is an area that I feel very strongly that if you don't know how to do, the interview process or, if you've never done usability testing before, it would be good even if they don't hire another firm for you to maybe, be with somebody else to act as your mentor or something else to really get what you need. So the first thing that I would explain to people is the difference between user-centered design and usability testing. Again, I could do like a 45-minute speech on each of this, but really user-centered design is more about your discovery process, if you think about it. So when you're doing interviews and when you're doing surveys and you're doing a lot of that, pre-work, I would say, before you do your usability testing, before you really build anything. That's really where one piece is. And that's actually really good. You generally only need about like 5 to 7 people from each target audience in order to do that, at least in terms of interviews. I love interviews because you can have a one-on-one discussion with people and really get what you need. Whereas with surveys and focus groups, I'm not as big of a fan just because surveys, there's really no follow-up. And focus groups, you get kind of what I call the mob mentality, where somebody's like, this is what I think, and then everybody jumps on that. You don't know if they're like jumping on that because you're like, I want to be the popular kid, or if that's what they actually think. So you really can never tell. So interviews are usually the best thing if you have limited time. And then there are some available tools. There's something called UX Check. I use it as it's a Chrome plugin. If you know how to do heuristic reviews and kind of understand a lot of Nielsen's concepts, you can just make screenshots and make notes about that particular like review area right there, and then you can download it. So that's a really good one. Open Hallway is for remote testing. So if you put questions in for a test, people can go in on their own and they can actually go and do their usability test without you having to be there. It's just a software. You end up listening to the recordings and getting everything you need. And then the last two are more for moderated testing. So I've gone the super cheap and easy route of GoToMeeting, where I have shared my screen, given somebody else control, and actually gone through and looked at it. And Moray is a little bit more expensive. Not going to lie, it's like thousands of dollars, and it is moderated, but the person has to be there, so it's in person, and it also only works on PCs. So there are definitely some restraints there, but at the same time, or constraints, but at the same time, if you want to go that route, you can definitely do that. So example homework for people. Just putting together some of that card sorting exercise. What would you want it to be? And then, again, kind of how would you want to rearrange that content, making sure they really understand navigation. So there are plenty of things, especially if you want to do usability and you feel like you have the knowledge to, take them to the next level. I would definitely say extra homework would be, give me a list of a few questions of what you want to ask. How are you planning on rating things and evaluating them? That's something else to look at as well. So you have finished the workshop, pretending it is 6 hours later and not 35 minutes after you have talked. And what are all of the things that you need to do? And by you, it's really, what do you need to tell the client that they need to do? So we've really started the process of getting them to think about everything that they need to do. They've done that homework, right? But think about it. When we said, okay, look at a piece of content, put together maybe 3 personas, put together a few vocabularies for your taxonomy, right? It is just the beginning. So there has to be an understanding that when they go through this workshop, it's not, oh, good, we made it through a 6-hour workshop. Okay, we're done and we're ready for our development. We're good. There is a lot more to do. And I know it can be a little bit scary for some people, right? Because guess what? When we have projects, we have budgets and we have certain resources, and you need to be careful about, how you're going to use things. And so there may be times where they say, you know what? Can't do personas. That's not important to us. You know what? Card sorting, we can't get it done. Like there may be some picking and choosing of what they need to do. So, please, if you're doing this workshop, let people know that if they don't, do everything, it's not like all is said and done and this was all for naught and, it's not good. There are still a lot of really good pieces that people can take out of that. But just know that if they were going to do the full list, this is kind of what we would recommend. So these slides, for the record, will all be up probably within the next 2 or 3 days. Same thing with the recording. So please do not feel like you have to write down all of these resources. I just wanted to make sure that they were at the end of the presentation. So kind of everything that I talked about, whether they were books or, I talked about like the Gestalt principles, like those are in there. I think I have something about how to write for the web. Like all of that is included in there to make sure that you have what you need when you go take a look at the slides later if you want them. And I know that I went a bit over, so thank you everybody so much, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I saw a question, yes. Yeah.
In the 6-hour, what role is there for discussion on entering content?
So generally, I don't go into entering content because I assume that people either already know Drupal or actually in the case of us giving this workshop, we hadn't gone through and even really started their work in Drupal yet. So it was more like this is all of the intro stuff that you need to do before you really, there were a few people I think on the team that had done some of the content entry, but the majority of the team hadn't been trained yet. So that's more what I would consider another like Drupal training that you would do to teach people how to add things. So Carl, did you have a question?
Do you have any tips for managing conflict? Because like you said, I've been in a meeting like that too, where one person has a suggestion, you don't know if, at times, of course, it's hard to determine where exactly they are. I mean, are they a major stakeholder or not? How do you try to figure it out and deal with things like that?
Okay, managing conflict. That's always a good one. So I think this is awful because I hate using this term, but it really depends. You need to figure out like what is in your job realm and what is not in your job realm. And I hate saying that because I am not the person to ever say like it's not my job. But at the same time, depending on who your client is, right? Like if there's conflict, for example, about content prioritization or about navigation, right? That's not my area of expertise, right? Because I'm not, especially if it's not in your own business and you're doing this with a client, that's really on them to have to decide, what is their priority? Because I can't say, oh no, I don't work in your, domain, but no, that you're wrong about what your priority is. That can be very difficult. I think if you start to get into some of those conversations, what I've done is try to have a small conversation in terms of, okay, why do you think this? Why do you think this? And try to go from there. And then based on that, sometimes I can say, okay, well, based on what I'm hearing, this might be, whoever person, this might be the best thing. But there are a lot of times too, and I'm sure you kind of asked that question too, because that can eat up an entire meeting if people are having that conflict. And you really don't want your entire workshop to be because somebody thinks one, audience group is more important than another or what have you. You don't want that to be the main thing. And so sometimes, just like any project manager would tell you that sometimes there's conflict and you have to say, okay, you know what? Sounds like there are some things that you need to work out. So why don't you, go back on your own and talk about those and then we'll regroup about it later. And that's kind of the way to, I hate to say it, but to really get out of those things. But it's not necessarily even to get out of it. It's to make sure that you're still going in the direction and it's still productive and helpful.
Because it always astounds me how much of that is bluster in the time. And it seems like you're saying your job is to keep it going.
Exactly.
A lot of that
it is.
That leaves falls away. And some of your findings after that.
Yeah, and I will totally say from a project management perspective that I still use that same. Fortunately, with the client that I haven't had to really do that, but absolutely in the past, I've had to use that tactic of, what sounds like there's some disagreement here. Why don't you go back and talk about it yourselves, and then, I'll check in a day or so, and then we can kind of, continue on with that conversation again.
In somewhat in more minor way, I've had user personas come to the rescue when there was conflict developing when it comes to content, looking at navigation, things like that. When somebody would bring up the user personas, I would usually put them on the walls.
Yeah, that's great.
Put them on the walls, and so sometimes as the content, things are getting a little tense. Somebody will bring up the user persona.
Yeah, and that's why personas are so good because it's like, person. It actually makes things real. I have sometimes had the conflict of they don't even really know who their target users are or who is, more important. And so sometimes that's hard, right? Because you can't build the personas without, or you could, but it might not be as valuable without it. But no, that's a great point that kind of as you get into that process, like bringing it back to the beginning. So, all right. Does anybody have any other questions?
Can I make one full recommendation?
Sure.
I love the other easy go-to meeting, but Moray is way outside our price. We usually use Silverback a lot.
Oh yeah.
$100. We've had a lot of success with it.
All right, sounds good. So just in case not everybody heard that, but Silverback is good. So yeah. You said Clearlight?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Does anybody have anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much, and I'll be up here for another 5 minutes or so if you have any other questions. So thank you.